Yeah, let's have a look and see. Lo yisireh sho achicho o esoyo nidochim v'salamta mehem o shev tashivem la'achicho. What do you do if you see, you see a donkey or an ox wandering around the street? So you got to go and give it back. What do you do if you don't know who it belongs to? You got to take it into your house and you got to look after it. So today, Baruch Hashem, the chances of you finding a donkey wandering around, is pretty minimal. But on the other hand, it's not just talking about donkeys, and it's not just talking about oxen. It's talking about anything. You find money in the, you find money, you find keys, you're not allowed to pretend that you didn't see them and then walk off and let somebody else take care of it. I think it's a very basic concept, very basic idea. I remember years and years ago, there used to be a program on television in England called, Rats, I can't remember what it was called, but it was like one of these consumer affairs programs, where they take care of problems that people have. What was it called? I can't remember. Watchdog, something like that. But it was, again, not for crime, it was just for, so they decided they want to do a little test to see how honest people are. So they put out 10 purses with 50p in it and some contact information, and they just put them out in various different locations in London to see what was going to happen. And interestingly enough, only 3 purses got back, and only one of them had the money in it. 7 of them just disappeared altogether. 2 of them, either the person took the money out and then phoned up the person and said, "I found your purse," or he found the purse empty. And 1 person actually brought it back with the money inside. They gave the money as a reward for having found the purse. It's interesting. I would hope that if that were to happen in a Jewish neighborhood, right? I would hope that the statistics would be the opposite. Actually, I would hope that most people would want to return this thing to who it belongs to, and you'd find a lot more purses than not. That's what I think, because that's what the Torah is telling us. We've got to be concerned about these things. What do you do if you've got no idea who it belongs to? So you've got to take it into your house and you've got to hold on to it. And Mitzvah Hashem, when Eliyahu Navi comes, when Elijah comes, he's going to take care of all of these things, which means that he'll be able to tell you who it belongs to and you'll be able to give it back to them. So that's your, an opportunity to hold on to this thing and to make a...
My Samsung S2 from October will be returned to me when Eliyahu Navi comes back. That's not the only reason.
Well, can you get onto the internet with it? Yes. Oh, then no, it won't be given back to you at all. It's obviously evil and wicked, and it makes you evil and wicked, and that's why God took it away from you. Of course, you, not recognizing the signs, went and bought something even more evil and even more wicked to take its place, and we're not going to talk about how that reflects upon you, because that wouldn't be nice, would it?
What does it mean you shall not hide yourself?
Which means like this: don't pretend that you didn't see it. What's the bottom line is that finding something, it's a little bit of a pain, right? Because, you've got to, the accepted norm over here is that you write up a few notices and you stick them up, right? Put them on the bus stops and you put them in the yeshiva somewhere, and hopefully whoever's found this thing is going to get in touch with you. And it's a little bit of a bother, right? So the easiest thing, of course, is just to turn a blind eye and pretend you didn't see it and carry on. And that's what the Torah is saying. Don't do that. Right, because that's not the correct thing to do. I tell you, the bottom line is like this. I feel like this: the same way that you would hope that if you lost your phone, that somebody would return it to you, right? So I guess you have to work on the premise that if you find somebody else's phone, you need to try and do your best.
It was really annoying actually, because then a couple of months later, I was at university, and my friend came to me with this much better version of my phone. Actually, it was the upgrade ×2, and just came and just said, "You'll never guess what, I've completely run out of my pocket money for this week. Because he obviously lives abroad from his family. I've got no money for anything, and I just found this phone, so I'm going to sell it for a couple of £100, and that should get me through until my next, instalment." And I was just like, "Listen, I just lost my phone 3 months ago, and it was just horrible." And he's like, "No, I'm keeping this." And I had a big argument with him, and in the end, I went on the phone, after persuading him, called mum on the phone or whatever,
right?
And they came and picked it up from the university.
Good, good for you. Okay.
Definitely.
So you did a little mitzvah.
But once you lose it, I guess, then you know how it feels.
Then you know how it feels, exactly, right? So
before.
it's interesting, isn't it? It's like here what the Torah is trying to do is trying to preempt. I tell you, excuse me for saying it quite like this, right? But it's a beautiful mitzvah what you did, but there's definitely maybe a little something missing from it, because the only reason that you reacted the way that you did is because you experienced the same thing yourself. What the Torah is trying to do is the Torah is trying to convince us to behave like that even without going through the experience of having lost something for yourself, right? That we're trying to get us to the position, to the point where we're going to help out everybody anyway, right? Regardless of whether I, have or haven't lost my phone, or I have or haven't lost my purse. If I find one, I'm going to do my best to try and get it back to who it belongs to. So the emphasis is like this. With phones, it's a lot easier, because inside the phone, you've normally got a pretty good selection of people that you could phone to find out who the phone belongs to. Whereas other things, of course, it's a little bit more complicated. You find a pen, you don't know whose pen it is, so you've got to hold on to it. And
to what extent does that count? If you find this pen, do I have to find the owner?
Well, in theory, it doesn't have anything to do with its intrinsic worth, so long as it's worth more than a pruta. A pruta is nothing. I don't know, maybe 5p or something, right? Which means that the concept of returning something lost has got nothing to do with it's got nothing to do with the cost of whatever it is. I'll tell you more than that, actually. It's not really for us to decide, what is precious in the eyes of somebody and what's not. So you could be holding a very cheap plastic pen that just happened to belong to that person's late father, and for him, it's got the most incredible intrinsic worth, right? And you may find a gold Rolex that belongs to some multi-billionaire, and it doesn't really make any difference to him. The guy doesn't wear that; he'll wear something else instead, right? Which means that the monetary worth of something is it should not have a bearing on what my obligation is to try and return it. Here, verse number 5. This is a bit I didn't want to upset anybody, be a party pooper over here, but we're going to do it anyway. Lo yechli geva al isha v'lo yilbash geva simlas isha. You're not allowed to wear ladies' clothing.
What about Purim? Is that fine?
You got yourself up there real quick, huh? On Purim it says that it is even though many authorities are not very happy about. Are you on the right page?
Yeah.
Many authorities not very happy about the idea of men wearing women's clothing at all, even on Purim as well. But at least there is definitely an opinion that on Purim it's okay to do that. Nevertheless, under normal circumstances, you are not supposed to wear women's clothing. Women are not supposed to wear men's clothing, right? It's considered to be an abomination. The sages explain that by men wearing women's clothing and women wearing men's clothing, it breaks down the barriers of tzniut, of modesty. Now, today, you may wonder, is that correct? It's not correct. There's an awful lot of unisex clothing today. How are we supposed to understand how this halacha is going to work in today's modern day and age? So the answer is very simple. Clothing that is made for men, women should not wear. Right? Clothing that is made for women, men should not wear. However, clothing that is not made specifically for men or specifically for women, so unisex clothing, would be something which is okay for either sex to wear. Right? So for example, I don't know, just as a sweat, like a sweatsuit, like sweatshirt and sweatpants, it's conceivable. I don't know very much about these things. You may be surprised to hear, but I am not very athletic. I know this will probably surprise most of you. Certainly the way that I look, it's difficult to imagine, but I'm really not very athletic, so I don't know. But it could, it's conceivable that certain kind of clothing are just, people buy them, men, women buy them. They're not made specifically for one gender, and if that's the case, then that's okay. Yeah, you want to say something?
There's sort of a new trend which has come out in the last 6 months, which is as weird as this sounds, started off by a very, very heavy R&B rapper, which is basically sort of wearing a skirt sort of thing. And personally, it's not my sort of thing, but I've seen a few of my friends who are into following what famous people wear. So if, for example, there was let's go to an extreme. Literally a pink, fluffy skirt, but it's in the male section, and it was commonly found in the male section. Would it then be counted as male clothing?
The truth is, I think it probably would. Instead of let's leave pink fluffy things behind. What about wearing a kilt?
Well, kilt's always men's clothing.
Kilts, men's clothing. Therefore, I mean, women also wear skirts that are tartan skirts, right? But however, a kilt is definitely a piece of man's clothing. If it became, accepted that men wear fluffy pink skirts, then I imagine that would be okay. Be interesting questions in tznius, how low it has to go. Do they have to go below your knees? It shouldn't go, whatever. How thick your tights should be, all that kind of stuff. But the idea over here is trying not to break down barriers. Right? There's a very sort of strict, a very defined idea of keeping the genders separated, and the reason for that is to try to keep us in a certain state of holiness, I guess is the best way to describe it. Okay, let's go. You're on the right page. Verse number 6. Verse number 6 is now something which is very, very odd. We've got a whole series of rather odd mitzvahs over here, which have got the most very beautiful dimension to it. Let's have a look and see. Ki yikareh kam ציפור לפניך, בדרך, בכל עץ או על הארץ, אפרוחים או ביצים, ואין רובצת על האפרוחים או על הביצים. You're walking down the street and you see in a tree a nest, and the nest has got a mother bird in it, and there are either eggs or chicks in the nest, and what are you supposed to do? לא ישיקח אם על הבנים, שלח תשלח את האם ואת הבנים תיקח לך, למען ייטב לך וארכת ימים. That you have to send the mother bird away, and you can then take the eggs or the chicks. Now, over here it doesn't say it, but what you can do is you can just lift the eggs up and put them back in again. There's a mitzvah of some kind, we'll talk about it in a moment. There's a mitzvah to send the mother bird away and to take the eggs away out of the nest, if momentarily or completely, and then the mother bird can come back to the nest afterwards. It's an interesting mitzvah. The Torah describes this mitzvah as being the easiest mitzvah to do. Right? Why is that? Because you can't prepare for a mitzvah like this. Right? What does it say? It says, Ki yikareh kan tzipor lefanecha b'derech. You just happen to be walking down the street and the nest is there. You can't prepare. Right? More than that, you can't decide, oh look, there's a nest, I'm going to go and get myself ready to do this mitzvah and go off to the mikveh and put on your gartel and say, mitzvahs, because by the time you've done that, the birds, the eggs will have hatched and the birds will have grown up and they will have gone already, right? It's a mitzvah that you do immediately on the spot without any kind of preparation whatsoever. The Chidush Arim, the first Gera Rebbe, one of the great Hasidic Rebbes, once explained, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says that mitzvah shouldn't be kal be'einecha. Don't let a mitzvah be easy. Yesh mitzvot kalot, the mitzvot chamurot. There are easy mitzvahs and hard mitzvahs. So explains the Chidush Arim, what is the definition of an easy mitzvah? Not necessarily a mitzvah which is easy to do, but rather a mitzvah which has you've got no preparation for it. That is a definition of a mitzvah kala, an easy mitzvah. You hear? A mitzvah chamora, presumably, according to what the Chidush Arim is saying. A hard mitzvah is a mitzvah which requires a tremendous amount of preparation before you can perform the mitzvah itself. So explains the Torah that the mitzvah over here, Shiluach HaKen, is a mitzvah. It's the easiest mitzvah in the book to do because you don't have to prepare for it in any shape or form whatsoever. You're walking down the street, you see the nest, you send off the bird. The Zohar has the most incredibly evocative, the most incredibly poignant description over here. It says that the bird goes flying up, the mother bird goes flying up in a panic, flying up into the air, squawking and squeaking, and the sounds come to the shamayim, they come to the spiritual realms, and the angels come to God and they say to God, don't you have any mercy on this mother bird? And God turns to the angels and he says, my children have been persecuted for, who knows, thousands of years, and it has you didn't hear their cries and you didn't hear their screams, and it doesn't bother you in the least, only the cries and the screams of the mother bird. He said, if that's the case, then I'll have to look after my children by myself. Which means somehow or other, explains the Zohar HaKodesh, somehow or other through this function of Shiluach HaKen, what are you doing by sending the mother bird away? You're somehow triggering off some kind of a dimension of divine mercy. Right? It's interesting, right? Through something which seems to be pretty cruel, it's going to trigger off a divine, some kind of merciful reaction from God. Interesting, the paradox over there. It says over here that if you fulfill the mitzvah, it says Leman yitab loch v'arachta yamim. It will be good for you and it will extend your days. You'll have long days over here, in this, presumably in this world. Yeah. The Gemara tells over the story of somebody called Acher, Rabbi Elisha ben Avuya, who was one of the greatest rabbis of the generation, who became an apostate. He became a heretic. He became an apicorus. And the Gemara asks, why did that happen? One of the things that the Gemara relates is that Rabbi Elisha ben Avuya watched a father telling his son to go up a tree to fulfill the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKen. And when the son went up to fulfill the mitzvah Shiluach HaKen of sending away the mother bird, the son fell out of the tree and died. And the Gemara is interesting. The Gemara says that the two mitzvahs that are mentioned over here in the Torah that promise you lengthy days are the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKen, of sending the mother bird away, and the mitzvah of Kibbud Av ve'em, honoring your parents. So Elisha ben Avuya, what did he say? He said, how can it be that here is a son who's fulfilling both of these at the same time? Right? His father sent him up the tree, and he's fulfilling the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKen, of sending away the mother bird, and he fell out of the tree and he died. And that was one of the things that triggered off this negative reaction from him, that he ended up leaving his belief and leaving behind everything that he'd achieved up until then. Again, he was one of the greatest rabbis of the generation, and he became a heretic. Ask the Gemara, how can that be? How can it be that, I understand when it talks about length of days, v'arachta yamim, it's talking about days in the world to come, not days down here. So how come he didn't know? How come, if we know that, how come he didn't know that? So the Gemara explains all kinds of things that happened within the life of Rabbi Elisha ben Avuya that turned him into who he became. That this was just the end. This was like the nail in the coffin, the straw that broke the camel's back, that made him react in the way that he reacted. But several things that happened in his life that were led to him becoming the apicorus, the apostate that he became. What is fascinating though is that these two mitzvahs, the mitzvah of sending away the mother bird and the mitzvah of kibbud av ve'em, are described by the Gemara as being the hardest mitzvah and the easiest mitzvah to perform. Right? Honoring your parents is a mitzvah which is very, very difficult to fulfill. Something that's very far-reaching. It's got lots of details inside of it. It's a very, very complex, very detailed mitzvah, not something that is easily done. Says the Gemara, in fact, it's the hardest mitzvah of all to fulfill. And on the other end of the spectrum is Shiluach HaKen, which is the easiest mitzvah to fulfill. And yet both of them, say the Torah, give you the reward of Arichas Yomim, of lengthy days.
This world?
So the Gemara learns in the world to come. What? Hold on a second. What's pshat? What's the most important thing over here to learn? So that's exactly what the Gemara is saying. That we have to take all mitzvahs seriously. If the easiest mitzvah, the reward is arichat yamim, and the hardest mitzvah, the reward is arichat yamim, then it's not for us anymore to decide which mitzvah is I'm going to take seriously, which mitzvah I'm not going to take seriously, which mitzvah is more important, which mitzvah is less important, but rather we have to treat the mitzvahs in exactly the same way, with exactly the same importance, each one.
Olam Haba is going to be Arichas Yomim for some people, some not.
Yeah. What that means exactly, that length of days, maybe it's talking about how soon you're going to get in there, as opposed to how long it's going to take until they get through the rectification process. I'm not sure. It's an interesting. Let me look into it. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Could it be? I was going to ask the same question as him. Could it be that you have longer days? Literally, like you won't need sleep. I guess you won't need sleep upstairs.
Upstairs there is no sleep,
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
is that what it means? Maybe.
No, but then if there's no sleep for everyone, then it's not really a thing. There's no end to
Maybe.
the amount of time you spend in. Once you're in heaven, you're in heaven, no?
Yeah, it's a little bit like being in here.
Yeah,
in
once
the
you're in
mornings.
here, you
Once
never
you're in
leave.
here, it's like
Why is it important if your days are prolonged?
You know what? Maybe I need to look into this, but maybe it's talking about some kind of a quality as opposed to a quantity. Do you know that it's interesting? There's a phrase of length of days and years, yamim v'shanim.
Days and years.
Now that's a very interesting phrase, no? Because yamim v'shanim, it says, for example, by Avram Avinu, it says that he lived, 175 days and years, right? What are we being taught by the phrase of days and years? Your years are the amount of time you spend down here in this physical world. Your days are what did I do with each day that was given to me? Did I live it to its fullest? Did I live it to its potential? Right? So I guess days and years are quality and quantity. A person can live here in this physical world for a relatively short amount of time and fulfill the most enormous amount. And a person can live here for a relatively long amount of time and not fulfill anything at all. Which means that the length of time that a person spends here in the physical world is of less importance than the quality of the time that's spent. And if a person uses, it's interesting, I once saw one of these cutesy little phrase, one of those cutesy things, I think I saw it in Reader's Digest for the first time, it's very famous, that the past is the past and the future is the future, and the now is a gift from God, which is why it's called the present. Right? And I think it's a very beautiful idea. I really do. However cutesy it is, however saccharine it is, I think it's a very beautiful idea that the present is something which cannot be returned. It can't be repeated. Right? Which means that we have to use each moment of the present in the best way that we can, in order to turn that into something which is going to allow us to move into the future in the way that we need to. Right? So actually it could be that this idea of arichas yomim, the length of days in the world to come, is talking about some kind of quality, spiritual quality of life up there, that a person would be lacking if he didn't do that. Good, okay, I think I've bored you into submission, right? So it serves you right for asking the question. I hope you've learnt your lesson, I really do. The mitzvahs are all the same, right? Easy ones, hard ones. We've got to treat them with the same amount of gravitas that we would, right? Because each one is its own thing. I always describe the mitzvahs as being, when you wear a sweater, right? So the sweater is made, it's being knitted, right? Something that's been knitted is made up of intertwined links, line after line after line of intertwined links. You ever tried pulling, you got a little bit of a loose thread in your sweater, you ever tried giving it a pull, trying to get rid of it, right? What happens? You lose the sleeve. Right? The whole thing just unravels because every part of the sweater is attached to every other part of the sweater, right? The mitzvahs are really no different. The mitzvahs are intertwined with each other. When you take, what happens to a small hole in a sweater? It becomes a big one, right? Because that's just the nature of the whole. Which means that the minute you start pulling away mitzvahs, then you've made a hole inside of the fabric, and then all of a sudden that hole becomes bigger and bigger until everything disappears. That's why there's a huge difference between somebody who says that I don't keep Mitzvah X because it's too hard for me, to somebody who says I don't keep Mitzvah X because I don't think the Mitzvah X is really a mitzvah. I don't like it. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's two different things, right? Somebody's prepared to be honest and to say, listen, you know what, Mitzvah X is too hard for me right now, which is why I can't do it. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes everything into account, right? However, when a person says, I don't believe that God wants me to do Mitzvah X, then what's he doing? He's poking a little hole in the fabric, and then after a while, by not doing Mitzvah X, you won't do Mitzvah Y, and you won't do Mitzvah Z, and you'll get round to the beginning, and Mitzvahs A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and all of them will begin to disappear one after the other. It's a process, and it's absolutely quite a rapid process when it starts unraveling. Yeah.
What's the difference between I don't think this is really a mitzvah, or it's too hard for me to understand why this is a mitzvah to be ready to accept it. But it's too hard for me to be
Here, I think if you're saying that it's too difficult for me to accept, then that might be a little bit of a problem. If you're saying it's too difficult for me to do right now, so again, that's okay. Which means that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands that every person's on a different level. Every person, I'll tell you more than that. Some people keep lots of very difficult mitzvahs. They really do. But some of the easy ones, they find it's too much for them right now. So long as the right now is pegged on to the end, then that's okay. But not to hide behind that. 5 years down the line, if the person's still not doing whatever it is, right? Not to hide behind that. Then it becomes a problem. And one of the biggest problems with mitzvah observance is that we have to be honest with ourselves. We really do. It sounds a lot better, in my mind, it sounds a lot better for me to say, this mitzvah is ridiculous, than to say this mitzvah is too hard for me. Because this mitzvah is ridiculous, that's my justification for not doing it. If I say this mitzvah is too hard for me, what am I doing? I'm basically getting up and I'm saying that I'm at fault over here, not the mitzvah, it's me. And that's a difficult level for a person to reach. But it's a much healthier level as well. And at least that way you're telling the truth. Now they tell over a very sharp story in the, go back 150 years ago in Eastern Europe, the ravages of the Enlightenment movement, what was called the Maskilim, it was everywhere. Making inroads everywhere. Even in Volozhin. Volozhin had the largest yeshiva of the time. And they say that Rav Chaim Volozhin once found 3 Talmidim who were obviously, they weren't in the yeshiva anymore, and they obviously weren't from anymore either. And Rav Chaim Volozhin says to them, mein Kinder, he says, my children, what happened to you? So they said to him, Rebbe, we had questions. So Rav Chaim Volozhin looked at him, he said to him, tell me, he says, did you have questions before you left the yeshiva or after you left the yeshiva? So the students said, well, we had them after we left the yeshiva. So Rav Chaim Volozhin looked at him, he says, no, he says, those aren't questions, those are answers. Which means I've chosen to let go of my religious observance. Now I'll build myself an ideology around why I've let go in order to justify the way that I behave. That's the way most people are. Not just with religious observance, in general. When we do things that we shouldn't be doing, first we decide that we're going to do what we want to do, and then we'll work out why it's okay to do it. You ever heard people who are, dishonest people, that they'll do whatever they can, that they sound ridiculous in order to justify why it's okay what they're doing. My father, Alav Shalom, he used to be a JP, a Justice of the Peace, and always it's a judge without any legal background. Every case in England has to go through a magistrate's court. And from there, if they don't want to deal with it, it's too big for them, then they'll kick it up to the next court. But the magistrates' courts were 3 judges sitting together, and they were called Justices of the Peace. You didn't have to be a judge, you didn't have to be a lawyer either. You went through training, but it was right? And he told me that, he said the most ridiculous case he ever had that came before him was there was a fellow who was stealing minicabs. Private cabs, not black ones, right? Private cabs. And he would steal a cab, and he would listen to the dispatcher, go and pick up the fare, drive the people around for a few hours, make his money, and then he would just ditch the car and finish. Anyway, one day he takes a fare. He's stolen this car, and he takes a fare, and the guy gets to where he has to be dropped off, and he opens up the door, jumps out, and runs away. That's a thief. So the driver was so incensed, he went down to the police station to file a complaint. So he's in there filing a complaint, and a policeman walks in and he says, tell me, he says, whose car is that outside with a license plate, whatever it is? So the fellow says, it's mine. He says, you're under arrest. That car was stolen. So, and his fellow's now standing in the dock, right, being tried for what he did. So my father said, can you imagine? Can you imagine the hubris of this person, right? This fellow is a thief, and somebody gypped him, so now he's going... Unbelievable, right? When people are dishonest, they'll do whatever they can to justify whatever they're doing. That's really what's going on, right? It's a lot better to get up and say, Rabbi Sai, I'm a lazy bum, and that's why I don't keep the mitzvahs. But you know what? In Mitzvah Hashem, one day I won't be so lazy, and maybe I'll get around to keeping them. That's a lot healthier than getting up and saying, you know what? I don't believe that God doesn't want me to do this, or I don't believe that God doesn't want me to do that.
Which a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And when do you think it becomes a problem? Like after how long would you say? Because I can admit right now that I find it hard to put tefillin on every day. But if I'm still standing here in 20 years' time saying, you know what, like I'm working on it, but I still find it hard
you know
to put
what?
tefillin on every day.
I think it's a question which is impossible to answer, because it is conceivable that for somebody 20 years down the line, maybe it is still difficult for them, and it's also conceivable that 20 years down the line, the person's hiding behind what once was, because it's just easier. Right? Well, we all of us know that not keeping the mitzvahs is easier than keeping them. We all know that, right? Where you can go, what you can do, what you can wear, where you have to be, how you can do it. I mean, these are things which are they control our entire day, one way or the other. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands entirely that for somebody it's just too difficult right now. Here, I'll give you an example. I had a Talmud once, a fascinating story. You see human nature, right? I had a Talmud once he was in advertising. And he'd taken off 6 months to come to the yeshiva. As he became frum, he decided that, this is what he needed to do. He said that advertising is a crazy, crazy business to be in. He said they would start at 11 o'clock in the morning, they start work. He said, but they work until 12 o'clock at night. He said it's crazy, completely crazy. And he said that as he started becoming more orthodox, so he said that Shachris was never a problem, because when you start working at 11 o'clock in the morning, you can squeeze a Shachris in there somewhere, right? And he said davening Ma'ariv was never a problem, because when he got home, he would daven Ma'ariv, whatever time it was, it didn't matter. He said, but Mincha was a problem. He said, because you're caught up in something and you don't have time, and it's you do it later, and this is happening and that's happening, and it's something very... He said for a long time it was fine, because he felt great about davening Shachris and Ma'ariv. He felt he was doing enough. He said, but after a while, he began to realize that he really needs to be davening Mincha as well. But what do? You can't get up in the middle of a meeting and say, excuse me, please, everybody, I just have to go into the corner, and I'm going to sway backwards and forwards for a little bit. But I'm okay, really. And then I'm going to take some steps backwards, and then I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to put my head down on my arm like this. But don't worry, I feel fine, really. And then I'm just going to stand up and say another prayer, and then we can carry on. So he said that for months and months and months he felt real bad about not davening mincha, but he never davened. He said one day they were pitching for the biggest account they'd ever pitched for. This was like millions of dollars worth of business, and they're in this boardroom negotiating backwards and forwards for hours and hours and hours. And he says he needs to go to the bathroom. And so fine, at the beginning he's able to ignore, but after a while it became rather pressing, I guess pun intended, right? It became a rather pressing issue that he had to go to the toilet. And it sort of reached the point where it wasn't a case of whether he was going to go or not, it was just a case of where he was going to go. Which means he could either go to the bathroom or he could go there in the boardroom, but it was going to happen come what may. So he said he picked himself up and he said, excuse me please, and he walked out of there and he went off to the bathroom and he's doing his business over there, and he suddenly realized, he said he had like an epiphany. He said nobody blinked an eyelid. No one. And he said after that he never missed another mincha after that.
No, he just said,
because he just said, excuse me please, and he went off and found himself a little room somewhere where there was no one in there, and then he davened mincha. Now, the emphasis he could have continued justifying to himself that it was impossible for him to daven mincha for months, maybe even for years. But justify. You're going to get upstairs at the age of 120, and God's going to say to you, you know what? You've got, 30 years worth of mincha you never davened. How come? And he's going to say, well, I was too busy. He said, well, you weren't too busy to go to the bathroom, were you? What are you going to answer? Yeah.
There's an issue with, I mean, I definitely have an issue with that. Why do we do mitzvah? Do we do it for ourselves or do it for God? And you wake up every morning, you put stifling on, you keep whatever, you do whatever.
Yeah.
And you're living your life for God, you might as well be a robot because you're not your own person kind of thing. Everybody else is doing the same thing potentially, so why do you do it? Do you do it for yourself?
Good question, right? What do you want to be when you grow up?
Teacher.
A teacher. And what? Go into the class and teach Jewish studies, and just go and do what every other teacher in Jewish studies does. Why would you do that? Yeah, I tell you, I want you to understand this very well, because the question is a very, very apt question. It really is. I mean, we all of us feel the same way at some point or another, right? My relationship with God is something very individual, very unique, and yet my ability to express that is very much constricted within inside of whatever the Torah is telling me to do. So to give you a ridiculous example, I would like to bond together with God by eating a cheeseburger, right? But I can't, because the Torah says not to do that, which means I'm now having my individuality stifled by the fact that I have to follow what God wants me to do, right? In the same way, you walk into a classroom, a Jewish studies classroom, you've been given a curriculum that you have to follow. Now you have a certain amount of flexibility within that to give over the material however you want. You can make it as interactive as you want, you can make it as exciting as you want. If you want, like the teachers that I had, you can make it as boring as you want. That's your decision as a teacher. But you are very much restricted within, first of all, what material you can give over, when you can give it over, right? And how you can give it over as well. Why is that? Because there is a greater need that's taking place over here. I'll tell you something fascinating. That the idea of stifling individuality is something which doesn't bother anybody until it comes to religion. Right? Which means that, anybody over here, whatever you want to do, you want to be a teacher, you want to be a lawyer, you want to be an accountant, whatever it is, you want to be a garbage collector. Everybody is completely constricted within inside of whatever it is that they need to do. I'll tell you even more than that. You want to do nothing and you don't want to work. Because hey, why not? But you want to use the internet, right? If you don't type in addresses properly on the internet, you can't get to where you want to get to. There was a very, very famous email that did the rounds years ago, but it was very, very strong. But a fellow wanted to know why Judaism was so detailed and why all these tiny little things make so much, right? And he wrote to the rabbi, and he says, "Rabbi, this is the second time I'm asking you. You never answered me. I guess my question is too strong for you." He says, "What do you mean I didn't answer you?" He says, "Of course I answered you." He says, I wrote in your thing, and I wrote at yahoo.com, and I left out the little dot. Right? And the whole thing was based on, that tiny little dot. If you don't have that tiny little dot in there, it's not going to work. Right? And it's the same in whatever you do. You want to be an accountant and you move the decimal dot along one, you've just made an enormous mistake. Enormous, yeah? If you're a heart surgeon and you decide to move things along a couple of millimeters, how much is a millimeter, for goodness sakes? You're going to kill the person. Everything comes down to minutiae, to details. The more there are, the better something is going to run. Everybody here you're probably almost sugar about sports, right? Football, yeah? Here, football, if you don't play according to the rules, then that's not football, what you're doing. I've mentioned this in the past. When I was a kid, I got taken to see the Harlem Globetrotters. Basketball. I don't know anything about basketball. Until today, I don't know anything about basketball. But these guys played. I don't know if you know who the Harlem Globetrotters were, but they were very, very entertaining, right? And I was convinced as a kid these have got to be the best basketball players in the world. The things that they were able to do. It took me a few years to understand that what they were doing was very entertaining, but it wasn't basketball. they wouldn't last 2 minutes on a basketball court. Because you got to follow the rules, right? And the rules inside of sports are very, very exact. Very exact. Here, tennis, right? You've got the linesman. The ball was like that, right? And that now it's no good. Is that fair? It doesn't matter, fair, not fair. Those are the rules, right?
You have instant replay now.
Yeah. Electronic lines you've got now, right? In football, if the ball goes over the line, it's a goal. If it doesn't, it's not a goal.
Sometimes if it does, it's also not.
I say it depends how much the referee's been paid off. That's not the issue right now, right? But you're here in every single thing that we do. Everything is dependent on the most unbelievable amount of detail. Why do you think Judaism's any different? HaKadosh Baruch Hu's given us a whole system over here, full of things that are going to draw us closer to Him if we do it His way. But if we don't do it His way, that's like leaving the dot out of yahoo.com. And now what are you left with? You're left with a message that hasn't gone anywhere. You hear? Again, I'm not, don't misunderstand me, I'm not trying to give it to you over the head, I'm really not.
I hear you.
Just trying to explain that. Kodesh Baruch Hu says you need to put on tefillin in the morning. So you need to put on tefillin in the morning because that's the way the morning needs to be, right? I'll tell you more like, listen, Rabbi say, I don't know if you know this stuff, but when you get up in the morning, everything is taken care of, right? I always say it, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, is pre-birth to post-death. There's not a moment that's not taken care of, right? You get up in the morning, you have to wash your hands like this and like that. And then you have to he even tells you how to put your shoes on. Right shoe first, left shoe second, left shoelace first, right shoelace second. You're getting up in the morning, you're saying to yourselves, do me a favor, does God cares which shoe I put on first? Does it make any difference?
The story about the soldier and the helicopter.
The story with the soldier, right? But here, you understand what the depth is over here? The depth doesn't make any difference to God. It makes a difference to us because if I can put my shoes on however I want, then it means that there's a moment in my day which doesn't have God in it. You hear? If I put my shoes on according to the way that Shulchan Aruch says to put on my shoes, what does that mean? It means that I'm putting on my shoes in the way that God wants me to do it. God is there as I put my shoes on. God is there as I put my tefillin on. God is there as I go out to work. God is there with everything I do. That's really what it's all about. That's why they're there. Really, that's why they're there. You ever wonder about the laws of kashrus? I bet you have, right? Most things that sound delicious are not kosher. When I was a kid growing up, there was a person called Bernard Matthews who had a turkey farm. And Matthews' turkeys came to the supermarkets, they weren't kosher. And he had adverts, they were basted in butter. So when they got to the supermarkets, and these things always looked absolutely delicious. They looked unbelievable. You ever wonder about kashrus? Anyone who tries to tell you that keeping kosher is a healthier lifestyle, don't listen to a word they say. You ever eaten standard Shabbos fare? Yeah? Chopped liver, galareta, kishka, cholent, that stuff blocks your arteries up just by looking at it. Right? It's got nothing to do with health, not physical health, it's to do with spiritual health. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying that this animal is kosher and this animal is not kosher. And if this animal is kosher, it's got to be shechted, it's got to be slaughtered in a certain way, because I want you to be aware of the fact that I am here the whole time. Every single moment of the day. You hear? There's a beautiful story they tell about a chassid who went off for the first time. He was a businessman, he lived in Warsaw, and he went off for the first time to do business in Paris. So he went to his Rebbe, the Chidushei Arim, the Ger Rebbe. He went in to ask him for a blessing, that he should be successful. So the Rebbe gave him a blessing, and then he tells him, then he says to the Rebbe, Rebbe says, is there anything I can bring the Rebbe back from Paris? So the Rebbe said, yeah, I want you to bring me back a cigar. I heard the cigars in Paris are something very special. Binyamin, is this right? I don't know, yeah. Something very special, and bring me back a cigar. So So the guy goes off to Paris, never been to Paris before in his life, so he does a lot of sightseeing. He has the most unbelievable success in his business. Fantastic. And he gets back onto the train to go back to Poland, back to Warsaw. And as the train is pulling out of the station in Paris, he suddenly remembers that his Rebbe said to bring him a cigar, and he forgot. And his face falls, and he gets very agitated. And the person sitting opposite says to him, "What's the problem?" He says, I promised my Rebbe that I was going to bring him a cigar from Paris, and I forgot. He says, "Don't worry." He says, "On the way we're going to stop in Brussels. And in Brussels, the cigars are even better than the cigars in Paris." So they stop in Brussels for an hour, and he gets off the train and he rushes off to the first place that he can find, and he says, "Bring me, I want the most expensive cigar that you have." They bring out this cigar. It's like this big. It's got a own wooden box. It's like, how much, doesn't care, however much it is. Here, take the money. He rushes back to the train. He gets on the train. Now that's it. He's so happy. He's going to come back with what the Rebbe asked for. So he gets back to Warsaw, says hello to his wife and his children, dumps his bags, goes off to the Rebbe with his box, comes into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says to the Rebbe, "I want to thank the Rebbe. I had the most incredible success in my business endeavors." And the Rebbe says to him, "Okay, and what else?" And the Chassid hands over this box to the Rebbe. The Rebbe looks at the box and he turns it over and he turns it over again. And he sees on the bottom it says "Made in Brussels." So he looks and he says, "What does this mean?" So the Chassid said, "Well, Rebbe," he says, "I'll tell you the truth." He said, I didn't get around to buying the cigar in Paris, but the person who I traveled back with told me that the cigars in Brussels are even better than the ones in Paris, and I promise the Rebbe that this cigar over here is the best cigar in the world. I promise." So the Rebbe looks at him and he says, "No," he says, "you don't understand." He says, "I asked you to bring me a cigar back from Paris because I wanted you to remember when you were in Paris that you had a Rebbe, and you forgot." Says the Chidush Harim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us mitzvahs everywhere and anywhere. It doesn't matter where you live, when you go on a holiday, wherever you are. We have to live our lives according to the mitzvahs. Why is that? That we should always remember that God is there together with us. We should never think, for 1 second, we should never imagine that there's a moment in our day that God is not going to be there.